In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom.
In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom. With these words, President John F. Kennedy called not just a nation, but an entire generation to rise with purpose. He didn't speak as a politician seeking applause. He spoke as a man who believed deeply in the responsibility of leadership, the power of courage, and the dignity of public service. But that voice, so full of resolve and vision, came from a boy who once raced barefoot through the sand dunes of Hyannisport. Before the Oval Office, before the campaigns, before the world knew his name, he was simply Jack Kennedy. Born in 1917 into a large, competitive, and ambitious family, young Jack was often sickly, struggling with illnesses that would shadow him for the rest of his life. But what he lacked in physical strength, he made up for with sharp wit, boundless curiosity, and a fierce sense of justice. He read widely, thought deeply, and carried a sense of duty early on. Not just to succeed, but to serve. The Kennedy family believed deeply in the idea that to whom much is given, much is expected. And Jack, though often in the shadow of his older brother Joe Jr., carried that expectation like a silent oath. When World War II erupted, both brothers enlisted, but fate would deal its first blow. Joe Jr. was killed in action, and suddenly the path of family legacy shifted. Jack, a lieutenant in the Navy, had already become a quiet hero after saving the lives of his PT-109 crew. His back broken, body injured, but will unshaken, he dragged a wounded sailor through the Pacific waters for hours. When asked later how he became a hero, he replied, "It was involuntary. They sank my boat." It was classic Kennedy, humility laced with humor, always deflecting glory, but never abandoning responsibility. After the war, Jack entered politics, first as a congressman, then senator. Behind the polished smile was a man of restless ambition, but also quiet reflection. He wrote, studied history, and questioned what kind of leader he wanted to be. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but he knew the power of words, timing, and presence. In 1960, at just 43 years old, he was elected President of the United States, the youngest man ever elected to the office and the first Catholic. It was a victory not just of age over experience, but of inspiration over cynicism. America was on the cusp of change, and Kennedy stood at the front of it. With wind-tossed hair, unwavering confidence, and a call for national purpose. He challenged the nation not to retreat into comfort, but to rise toward greatness. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And millions listened. The Kennedy presidency was brief, just over 1,000 days. But in that time, the world turned faster. The Cold War grew colder. The threat of nuclear war loomed over every city, every child, every tomorrow. But JFK faced it not with fear, but with resolve. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world stood on the brink of annihilation. And yet, through diplomacy, strength, and a refusal to panic, Kennedy steered the country and humanity away from catastrophe. He believed peace was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. He didn't fear negotiation, he feared silence. And he used his presidency not to expand conflict, but to limit it. At home, he turned his attention to civil rights, slowly at first, but increasingly with moral clarity. In a time when standing for racial justice could cost political capital, he chose principle over popularity. The rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened. With those words, he pushed America toward its better self, toward fairness, toward equality, toward dignity. He also dared the nation to look up, to dream. We choose to go to the moon in this decade, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. He understood that greatness was forged in struggle, that achievement meant reaching beyond comfort. That speech, given at Rice University in 1962, wasn't just about space, it was about aspiration. And yet, even as he pushed the country forward, the weight of the world pressed down on his shoulders. Behind closed doors, Kennedy dealt with chronic pain, political pressure, and the burden of decision no man can truly prepare for. He bore it with grace, On November 22nd, 1963, the world stopped. In Dallas, Texas, a gunshot shattered the dream. The motorcade, the smile, the wave, all gone in an instant. And yet what could have ended with that moment only grew. Because John F. Kennedy's legacy didn't die that day, it multiplied. In the voices of civil rights leaders who carried his message. In the footprints on the moon left by astronauts inspired by his challenge. In the hearts of every child who saw that politics could be poetic, leadership could be noble, and public service could still be sacred. Today, his life reminds us that charisma alone is not legacy, action is. That hope alone is not change, courage is. That freedom is not guaranteed. It must be defended, lived, and earned. A man may die, nations may rise and fall, but an idea lives on. JFK believed in ideas, and in the power of a free people to realize them. This is why we remember him, not just for the way he died, but for the way he lived. For the boy on the beach, the soldier at sea, the senator with vision, the president who believed the future belonged not to the fearful, but to the bold. He asked us to do more than watch history. He asked us to shape it. And in a world still struggling to define its direction, we need voices like his more than ever. And yet perhaps what made John F. Kennedy so extraordinary was not just his eloquence or his achievements, but the clarity of his belief that the American experiment was still unfinished, and that its success depended on every citizen. He did not romanticize the nation's flaws. He acknowledged them, confronted them, and dared the country to do better. He saw leadership not as a throne, but as a trust. Not as privilege, but as responsibility. Even abroad, his presence mattered. In Berlin, he stood against the Iron Curtain of oppression and declared, "Ich bin ein Berliner." 4 words, but to millions living under the shadow of division, they were a promise that the United States would not abandon them, that freedom had a voice and it spoke with courage. In Africa, Latin America, and Asia, he inspired a generation of young Americans to join the Peace Corps, serving not as conquerors, but as neighbors, teachers, and builders. He believed that diplomacy was not weakness, it was wisdom, that the hand of peace could reach further than the arm of war. He knew the dangers of the atomic age, but believed that human reason could still triumph over destruction. His 1963 Strategy of Peace speech at American University remains one of the most visionary ever delivered by a U.S. president, calling not just for arms control, but for understanding, not just treaties, but trust. He reminded us that peace is not passive. It must be practiced, preserved, and protected with the same determination we show in times of conflict. And then there was the way he lived, with elegance, discipline, and a sense of time that always seemed to run out too quickly. In the public imagination, he became something more than a politician. He became a symbol of youth, of possibility, of the idea that greatness and grace could walk side by side. Even those who disagreed with him could not deny the force of his presence. He was not without flaws. No great leader ever is. But his flaws never outweighed his vision. He brought poetry to policy, style to statesmanship, humanity to power. He made Americans believe again, not just in their government, but in themselves. And in the years since his passing, when America has struggled, when division has deepened, or hope has seemed out of reach, many have turned back to his words, to the cadence of his speeches, to the steadiness of his leadership, to that unmistakable voice. The one that reminded us that democracy is not something we inherit, it's something we defend every day. In the long history of the world, he began. And what followed was not just a line, it was a challenge to do more, to stand taller, to reach higher, because freedom isn't self-sustaining. It must be carried by each generation, like a torch, handed from hand to hand, heart to heart. John F. Kennedy carried that torch through storm and doubt and war and change. And though the flame was stolen too soon, the light it cast has never gone out. It lives in those who still believe that words matter, that truth matters, that service matters. It lives in every citizen who dares to dream not just of a better world, but who dares to build it. JFK never promised that the work would be easy. He promised it would be worth it. and that is why we remember. The past is not forgotten. It lives again through these stories, these images, and these voices. Thank you for joining us in History Gets Alive. Until next time, keep remembering, keep reflecting, and don't forget to subscribe our channel.